Most people who can't get what they want in life aren't failing because of a lack of effort. They're failing because no one ever explained to them how reality actually works. And the most disturbing part of it all is that while these people are trying, struggling, and exhausting themselves, trying to change what's on the outside, their minds are quietly creating, in silence, exactly what they don't want. This isn't philosophy. This isn't surface-level self-help. This is what Itzhak Bentov, an engineer, researcher, and one of the most serious thinkers on consciousness of the 20th century, spent decades documenting. And what he discovered contradicts everything society teaches about how to build a life. You don't manifest what you desire. You manifest what you dominantly feel. And if no one has ever shown you how to genuinely and consistently change that dominant state, then you've spent years, maybe decades, transmitting to the universe the exact frequency of the things you most want to avoid, without realizing it, without meaning to, and without having the slightest idea of how to stop. In this video, you're going to understand how this process works from the inside out. You'll understand why your mind is already manifesting right now, why the results that show up in your life are a precise reflection of your vibrational state, and what needs to change so that this process starts working in your favor. Not in a vague way, not with empty promises, but with the depth and clarity that this subject truly deserves. If you've ever tried manifestation techniques and saw no results, this video is going to show you exactly where the process is being sabotaged. And if you've never explored this territory before, what comes next will permanently change the way you see your own mind and the reality it's creating. Stay until the end, because what Bentov discovered about the mental state that unlocks manifestation is something most people will never hear anywhere else. Something is happening to you right now that probably no one has ever properly explained to you. It's not about luck, it's not about effort, and it's definitely not about deserving. It's about something far more fundamental than any of that. It's about what your mind is transmitting to the universe every single second of the day, with or without your permission. Itzhak Bentov was an engineer and researcher who spent decades trying to understand the relationship between human consciousness and the energetic structure of the universe. And he arrived at a conclusion that, at the time, sounded absurd to many people, but that modern science has been gradually confirming. The human mind is not merely an organ that thinks. It is a transmitter and receiver of energy. It is in constant communication with the energetic field that permeates everything around it. Every thought you have generates a frequency. Not metaphorically, literally. The human brain produces measurable electromagnetic waves, and those waves carry the emotional quality of what you're thinking. Worry has a frequency. Gratitude has another. Fear has a frequency completely different from confidence. And the energetic field of the universe responds to these frequencies with precision, not randomly. Now think carefully about what this means in practice. Most people wake up in the morning already carrying the weight of unpaid bills, of problems that weren't resolved the day before, of uncertainties about the future. And throughout the day, that mental pattern repeats itself dozens of times. Every time the mind returns to worry, it emits that frequency again. Every time a thought falls into doubt, into comparison, into the feeling that things aren't going to work out, the internal transmitter is working, just on the wrong frequency. And what happens? The universe responds to exactly what's being transmitted, not because it's cruel, not because there's some kind of divine punishment, but because this is the basic operating mechanism of the energetic field, resonance. What you emit, you attract back, not as philosophy, as physics. Bentov said that the great mistake most people make isn't about whether or not they believe in manifestation. The mistake is thinking that manifesting is an isolated practice, something you do for a few minutes a day, while the rest of the time your mind drifts wherever it wants. Manifestation doesn't work that way. It's happening all the time, without stopping. The question isn't whether you're manifesting, because you already are. The real question is, what exactly are you manifesting with your dominant emotional state? That question is unsettling. And it should be, because it throws the responsibility directly back onto the person. Not onto fate, not onto luck, not onto circumstances. Onto the internal frequency pattern that each person carries, and that very few people ever stop to observe with honesty. The moment someone truly understands this, changes something deep in the way that person looks at their own life. It's not a surface-level intellectual understanding of, oh, I need to think positive. It's a structural understanding that the reality you're living today is, in large part, the reflection of the frequency you sustained over the months and years prior. And if that's true, and Bentov spent his entire life arguing that it is, then the question that hangs in the air is, how exactly does this field that responds to your mind actually work? Bentov described the universe in a way that few scientists of his era had the courage to put into words, an immense ocean of conscious energy, where nothing is truly separate from anything else. What appears to be empty space between things, between you and the chair, between the earth and the sun, between a thought and an action, is not empty. It's a field, a living, responsive field that carries information and reacts to everything that comes into contact with it. Think for a moment about the structure of everything that exists. Solid matter, when observed at the subatomic scale, is almost entirely space. The electrons orbiting the nucleus of an atom are proportionally as far from that nucleus as the Earth is from the Sun. What appears dense and fixed is, in reality, organized vibration. And if everything vibrates, then everything is in some form of communication with everything around it. Not poetically, structurally. This is where Bentov's vision begins to make sense in a way that goes beyond conventional spirituality. He wasn't talking about blind faith or magical thinking. He was talking about physics, about how vibrational systems interact with each other. Two stringed instruments tuned to the same note, placed near each other, do the same thing. When one vibrates, the other begins to vibrate as well, without any physical contact. This is called sympathetic resonance, and that same principle applies to the relationship between the human mind and the energetic field of the universe. The frequency you sustain internally, through your emotions, your repeated thoughts, your most deeply rooted beliefs, enters into resonance with corresponding patterns in the field, and the field, being responsive by nature, begins to organize probabilities around that frequency, not all at once, not in a spectacular and immediate way, but consistently and cumulatively. The opportunities that reach you, the people who show up in your life, the ideas that arise at the right moment, all of this has a direct relationship with the vibrational state you've maintained over time. Bentov also drew attention to something people normally overlook. Emotional intensity matters just as much as consistency. A weak, generic emotional state that, oh, it would be nice if things got better, doesn't generate enough resonance to move the field in any meaningful way. What moves the field is a clear intention, charged with genuine emotion, sustained with regularity. It's the difference between throwing a stone into a calm lake once and throwing a stone repeatedly into the same spot. In the second case, the waves amplify, the resonance deepens. And that's exactly why two people can go through the same type of difficult situation and come out of it in completely opposite directions. One of them, even in the face of adverse circumstances, maintains internally a frequency of possibility, of movement, of the belief that something can change. The other enters vibrational collapse, closes itself off in fear, in rigidity, in the certainty that nothing is going to work. The field doesn't judge either one. It simply responds to what's being transmitted. Bentov made this clear in his studies. The universe has no preference for anyone. It doesn't favor the clever, the rich, the beautiful, those who pray more, or those who have been meditating for longer. It responds to the vibrational field, period. And that is, at the same time, the most liberating and the most uncomfortable news someone can receive, because it removes every external excuse and places the creation of one's own reality in the hands of the person living it. From this understanding, the natural question that arises is, if the field responds to the frequency of the mind, then what is the specific mental state that maximizes that response? Bentov spent years studying altered states of consciousness and what happens in the brain and body during those states. And one of the most important discoveries he documented was the existence of what he called internal coherence, a specific state in which thought, emotion, and intention stop pulling in different directions and begin to operate as a unified force. And when that happens, the relationship between the mind and the energetic field changes in a radical way. To understand why this state is so powerful, it's worth first looking at what happens in its absence. Most people live in a state of constant internal fragmentation. The mind wants one thing, the body feels another, and the deepest beliefs contradict all of it. Someone can spend hours thinking about financial prosperity, while, deep within their nervous system, they carry an ingrained belief that money is hard, that they weren't born to have abundance, or that the people around them will never allow it to happen. This conflict isn't merely psychological, it's vibrational. It creates an internal noise that dilutes the frequency of intention before it even gets to interact with the field. Bentov described this phenomenon with almost surgical precision. He said that the human mind, in this fragmented state, functions like a transmitter with static. The signal exists, the intention exists, but the message that reaches the field is confused, contradictory, weak, and the field, being precise in its responsiveness, reflects back exactly that confusion in the form of inconsistent results, opportunities that appear but never materialize, changes that start but don't sustain. Internal coherence solves this problem at the root. It is not a state of artificial euphoria, not forcing a smile while everything crumbles around you. It's a state of genuine alignment, in which a person connects authentically with what they desire, emotionally feels the reality of that desire as if it were already present, and directs intention from that place of internal integrity. In that state, the noise disappears, the transmitter clears the signal, and the frequency that reaches the field is clear, cohesive, and powerful enough to create real resonance. What makes this even more fascinating is what happens in the brain during this process. Neuroscience research shows that the brain does not fully distinguish between an experience lived with real intensity and an experience lived with emotional intensity inside the mind. The same neural networks that activate during a physical experience activate during an emotionally charged visualization. This means that by mentally sustaining the reality of something that hasn't yet happened physically, the brain begins to treat it as an established fact and starts orienting perception, decision-making, and behavior in the direction of that fact. Bentov saw this as the key that most people never find. Not because it's secret or inaccessible, but because it requires something that goes against modern conditioning, to stop reacting to the external world and start creating from the internal world. Society trains people to do the opposite, to respond to what's outside, to let circumstances dictate the emotional state, to only feel good after things improve. Internal coherence completely inverts that logic. It requires you to feel first, to align first, to transmit the frequency of the result before it appears in physical reality. And it's exactly at this point that visualization enters the picture, not as a superficial motivational exercise, but as a precision energetic mechanism that very few people truly understand in depth. Visualization, as Bentov understood it, has nothing to do with that oversimplified idea of closing your eyes and daydreaming. He treated visualization as a technical process, a tool of consciousness engineering that, when used with precision, simultaneously activates neurological and energetic layers that most people don't even know they have. And the difference between using this tool superficially and using it correctly is the difference between planting a seed in asphalt and planting it in fertile soil. What makes a visualization energetically active is not the clarity of the mental images, it's the emotional intensity that accompanies those images. The human brain processes emotion and reality through deeply interconnected circuits. Studies with elite athletes show that the mental simulation of a physical movement, done with focus and intensity, activates the same muscle fibers that would be used in the real movement in nearly identical sequence. The body doesn't know it's a simulation. It responds as if it were real. And if this happens at the physical level of the muscle, it happens also at the energetic level of the vibrational field. Bentov described this process as the creation of an energetic mold. Every physical reality begins as a structure in the field before manifesting in matter. When a human mind sustains a vision with clarity and genuine emotion, it is sculpting a pattern in the energetic field, a mold that the universe begins to fill with physical correspondences over time. Not instantaneously, because matter has inertia, but progressively as the field reorganizes probabilities, circumstances, and connections around that structure that was imprinted with intention. This is why great inventors, leaders, and creators throughout history report the same kind of experience, the feeling that what they built in the physical world already existed in complete form inside the mind before it existed on the outside. not as daydreaming, but as a solid internal certainty. Tesla described his inventions in meticulous detail before building them. Olympic athletes mentally trace every inch of the course before they step up to the starting line. Visionary leaders make decisions from a reality that hasn't yet materialized, but that is already alive within them with the force of an established fact. They weren't doing this out of superstition. They were, intuitively or deliberately, using exactly the mechanism that Bentov described. The point Bentov always made sure to emphasize was this: the mind does not distinguish between what is real and what is experienced with sufficient emotional intensity. And once the mind accepts something as real, once the pattern is established in the internal field, it begins to filter external reality in a different way. Opportunities that were always there begin to be perceived. Connections that seemed impossible become obvious. Decisions that previously caused paralysis are made with clarity because the mind is operating from a solid internal point of reference, not from the uncertainty of the external environment. But here's the detail that most people completely overlook, and that sabotages the entire process without them even realizing it. Visualization, as powerful as it is, represents only a small fraction of the time the human mind is active throughout a day. And what happens in the rest of that time carries a far greater vibrational weight than any isolated practice of a few minutes. Bentov had a very direct way of explaining this problem, and it deeply unsettled those who heard it. He said that the mind-body system functions like a continuous oscillator, a frequency generator that never stops, that has no off switch, and that is emitting a signal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Spiritual practice, meditation, visualization, all of these have real value, but none of them cancels out the dominant state the person carries throughout the rest of the day. And that's exactly where the silent mistake lives, the one that blocks manifestation for the vast majority of people. It's not a lack of technique. It's not a lack of intellectual belief. It's the contradiction between what a person practices for a few minutes and what they sustain emotionally for hours. 10 minutes of prosperity visualization don't carry enough vibrational weight to overcome 12 hours lived inside a frequency of anxiety, comparison, and scarcity. The field doesn't take averages. It responds to the dominant pattern. And the dominant pattern is always the one that occupies the most time and the most emotional intensity in a person's life. Think about what this means in the reality of everyday life. The person wakes up, does their morning practice, feels that good feeling for a few moments, and immediately afterward opens their phone, dives into the news, compares their own life to someone else's on social media, feels that familiar sting of everyone else moving forward while they're standing still, arrives at work carrying that weight, spends the day reacting to situations that feed even more into the feeling of having no control, and goes to sleep exhausted with their mind spinning around the same old problems, and the next day they repeat it. The internal oscillator keeps emitting the same frequency, not because the person is weak or incapable, but because no one has ever shown them that this pattern needs to be worked on consciously and continuously, not just during specific moments of practice. Bentov emphasized that vibrational patterns are built through emotional repetition. Just as a muscle grows stronger with consistent training, a frequency stabilizes with consistent sustaining. And this works in both directions. The frequency of fear becomes more stable the more times it's fed. The frequency of confidence also becomes more stable the more times it's deliberately cultivated. The difference is that fear and anxiety are fed automatically by the environment, by culture, by conversations, by news, by unconscious mental habits. Confidence and clarity need to be cultivated with intention, because nothing in the external environment is going to do that for you. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's also a tremendous opening, because it means that the frequency you carry today is not permanent. It was built over time through a set of choices, habits, and conditionings, many of them unconscious. And what was built unconsciously can be rebuilt consciously, not overnight, not with a single moment of enlightenment, but with the same consistency that created the old pattern, now directed toward creating a new one. And when that rebuilding truly begins to happen, when a person's dominant state begins to shift in frequency in a stable way, something starts to transform in that person's relationship with the reality around them. Not in an abstract way, in a concrete, perceptible way, sometimes unsettling in the intensity with which it unfolds. Bentov arrived at a point in his studies that few researchers had the courage to openly defend. Physical reality is not a rigid, unchangeable structure. It is malleable. Not in the sense that you can bend spoons with your thoughts or make objects float in the air, but in the sense that human consciousness, when operating in coherence and with sustained intention, has the genuine capacity to influence the field of probabilities around it. And that changes everything about how a person can relate to their own life. Quantum physics has already documented that subatomic particles don't have a defined position before being observed. They exist as a cloud of probabilities that collapses into a specific reality at the moment of observation. Bentov saw human consciousness functioning analogously on a larger scale. The reality you live is not the only possible reality. It's the reality that collapsed from the field of available probabilities in response to the vibrational state you sustained over time. Other possibilities existed, others continue to exist, and the internal state you cultivate from now on begins to influence which of those possibilities will materialize in your experience. This is why people who go through a profound internal transformation frequently describe the experience with similar words. Things started falling into place. The right people started showing up. Opportunities I wasn't even looking for arrived out of nowhere. From the outside, it looks like coincidence. From the inside, those who lived it know it wasn't. It was the field responding to a frequency that had changed. It was the internal oscillator emitting a different signal, and the universe reorganizing probabilities around that new signal. Bentov didn't romanticize this process. He made it clear that aligning consciousness with the creative flow of the universe doesn't mean life turns into a path without obstacles. It means the person stops fighting the current and starts moving with it. The difference between forcing and flowing isn't passivity, it's direction. A trained mind doesn't push reality. It aligns with the forces already in motion and directs that energy with clear intention. Effort continues to exist, but it stops being exhaustion and becomes natural movement. And here is the most quiet and most powerful point of everything Bentov studied. The transformation of external reality always begins, without exception, with a transformation in the internal state, not the other way around. Most people spend their lives waiting for external circumstances to change so they can then feel different on the inside. They wait for the bank account to grow before they feel secure. They wait for the relationship to improve before they feel loved. They wait for recognition to arrive before they feel capable. Bentov said that this waiting is the oldest trap in human experience because it inverts the order of the creative process. The internal frequency comes first. External reality is the reflection, not the cause. Every person who has truly internalized this and begun to operate from this understanding has gone through a shift that goes far beyond what any manifestation technique could produce on its own, because it's no longer about using a method to get things. It's about fully and consciously assuming the role of creator of your own experience. Understanding that consciousness is not trapped inside a body reacting to the world, but that it is an active force that interacts with the energetic structure of the universe at every moment. That is what Bentov spent his life trying to show. And now that the complete map is in sight, the question that truly matters is not whether this works. It's what you're going to do with this knowledge starting today. If this content opened something inside you, if it touched something you already felt but had never been able to put into words, leave that in the comments. Share what you noticed about your own vibrational pattern. That kind of conversation is rare, and it needs to happen more. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because this is only the beginning of a much deeper exploration of consciousness, manifestation, and what the human mind is truly capable of creating. There's a lot more coming, and you won't want to miss it. And